Yes, I was born in Martins Ferry, Ohio. That's down along the river, right across the bridge from Wheeling, West Virginia. And really, that's coal mining territory back in those days. As a matter of fact, if you know what you're looking for, you can still see remnants of that time. Uh, I think I came to Warren between the years of 1942 and 1945. Came here and moved into a house right outside what we call the Benton Homes on Benton Street. And that's where I met the Sappos, the Wesleys, and several others. And my neighbors were, now this is outside the projects, there was a big hedge bush there. Mr. and Mrs. Gasper, he did not like anything of color. She was a good woman. You know? And across the street on Benton Street were the Gradishards. And I don't know if that name sounds familiar. Randy and yeah, yeah. And then right across Niles Road were the Marinos. And as kids, we kind of hung out together, you know. And they used to say, Peter, you know a little bit about 3 different languages. Maybe 10 or 12 words, which I've long forgotten. I said, yeah, I can speak a little of that Italian and whatever, Polak or whatever they called them back in those days, yeah. But I can remember we really didn't cross Niles Road. There was the Benton Homes, then across Niles Road, they were called the Ridge Homes. Those were for white folks. We had our place and they had theirs. Through the years there, people such as Bill White, Wendell Chance, they would pay us a nickel to chase baseballs. And then send us across Niles Road to what we called it was the fruit market, to get pop. Back in those days, you could get a Coca-Cola or Pepsi in the bottle, no cans, for a nickel. And those are some of the things I remember about the Benton Homes. And the history still goes on because there was a really nice man. His name was Mr. Tolles. Okay. And he was really nice, and he went out of his way to make things as good as he could for us people living in that area. And his wife, and some people don't know this to this day, they remember her as being Mrs. Cathy. But really, she was married to Mr. Tolles. And she was just a great educator. She taught us a lot, and how to act, how to be. Can remember going to school at Francis E. Willard. And we would walk, every day we'd walk up to Francis E. Willard, and we really didn't know the kind of shape we were in as a group from an economical standpoint until we went to Willard. And then, we were in class with people like Gene Capella and several others, and their fathers were like foremen or something at Packard Electric. And the difference is like the Great Divide. And Mr. Joe, he was the principal, and Mr. Bearducci, he was a teacher. He said, one day, things won't be like this, and you can have. Like they had a big Ford Fairlane, and said, you can have this, if you stop being bad. Yeah. So those were some good days at Francis Willard. The Sappos, Mrs. Sappho, I can remember. And this was after my mother passed away. That was in an early age. And I would walk down Benton Street there, and she had called me. Petey, she said. Say, come here. And she'd be done bake something, you know. And she'd tell me, I want you, don't get off these steps. You eat that right here on this step, and don't you move. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You know, Mr. Sanford was a good person. You know, your father, smart man. Right. Robert was very intelligent, very intelligent. And I can remember him in his office, which was diagonally across the street there, when he had that. And he opened up some doors, you know, at Packard and a few other places. And probably the biggest problem with progress is some people forget from where they came. You know, and that certainly happened here. It certainly happened here.
Well, I want to ask you about, back to your childhood.
Yes.
So you mentioned that you lived near the Benton homes, but you didn't actually live in the Benton homes, which was the project, the segregated projects where most African Americans live. So tell me about how it is that you lived in a home when most of the other blacks lived in the projects.
I think it was a blessing. I think that my mother's mother, her husband, they were blessed because he got a job early on in a plant. It was called Mullins Manufacturing. And he was one of the few at that time that had a so-called decent job. And that's how. Now, my grandmother wound up losing that house. Okay. She wound up losing, my mother's mother wound up losing that house because he died, okay? And then there was no income. And I can recall the Spains, Foley, Spain, they were like, I shouldn't even use the term. Not only were they a term, they owned a lot of property. And they came up with that house, okay? And
so was your grandfather able to get a loan to buy that house?
now keep in mind, at this time, hey, Robert, keep in mind, he was gone. He had died. And it was just hard to make ends meet after that. It brings back a lot of memories. So she wound up, turning over the deed of that house to the Spains. And we just kind of make ends meet month to month. Then eventually she passed away. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking that, remembering what I can about Grandpa Bill, and they were both named Bill. Had he not gotten sick and passed, he'd have kept that house. You know, he was different like that, you know, too different. You know, too different. He would tell me as a kid, and he had a car, an old, with the stick shift on the floor, you know. And he'd tell me, he'd say, Pete, he said, come on, we're gonna go look at the monkeys. You know what he was referring to. You know, the old International Cafe. And we'd ride down, and he'd park the car there, and he said, you stay in the car. And I'd stay in and watch them, you know, do whatever it was they was doing down there. Yeah. Mm. But yeah, she lost that house. Now, there were my other grandmother, my father's mother, and I guess you're wondering, where was your father all this time? I don't know, yeah. I don't know what he was doing, you know, to be honest. So in essence, they took turns taking care of me. It's like the entire village. There was a bunch of people that looked after me in the big homes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mary Seiler. I don't know if that name rings a bell. Diane McBride. Okay, her mother was married to a guy named Big Bill Seiler. Mm-hmm. Yeah, before she remarried, he died, she remarried. And she was just like a mother to me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Miss Sampo, yeah. Mary McFadden. They all saw to it that, you know, it was kind of taken care of. Yeah, yeah.
So you also mentioned that you played with white kids.
Yeah.
So was that the norm that black kids and white kids played together
Oh,
back
no.
then?
No, not really. Not really. No. As a matter of fact, I was probably the only one that played with those kids. Their boundary really was not to cross Niles Road. And my boundary was not to cross Niles Road going the other way. Yeah. No. But we just happened to be neighbors. And there was a field. And we'd go out there and play baseball. And here we go, sports is the common denominator. Yeah. And that's how that went. But oh, no. Unheard of. Not until probably the 9th grade, when we began to meet, kids that weren't of our own ilk, different colors and so forth, and they came from across Perkinswood, yeah, with money, and we got to be, friends, and we found out, hey, they're okay. We don't have to be afraid of these people, and they found out we weren't what they were told we were. Yeah, so it worked out, but only through sports. Yeah, some of my best friends today are white. Yeah.
So when did you find out that you were super talented as an athlete?
I don't say it. Don't say it.
You're just being modest.
I was blessed with some skills. And it's odd that you should ask that because it was others that saw it. Okay. Long before I saw it. Others saw it. And people like Mr. Blakely, the Reed brothers, who were, bless all of them. They saw it. Some of my teachers, one of them suggested that I come to St. Mary's, which is now Kennedy, because they saw the big picture. That if I continued to hang out with the people I was hanging out with, I would wind up almost where I wound up. So they said, why don't you come to St. Mary's? And I think I went there about 2 weeks. And I said, I can't do this. I said, I can't do this. There was a guy, he was like my mentor. He kept me in clothes, nice clothes. He always saw to it that I had a little money. His name is Chris Douglas. And I like Chris from years and years ago. His aunt was a professor. And he used to come back home and he said, man, you can do this, you can do that. You're no dummy. So he took me under his wing. And he said, here's what we're gonna do. Because by this time, the coaches in the schools were fed up with me.
Why?
Well, you can't go around telling these other kids, give me your lunch money. Or else, you just can't keep doing that. And I had a habit of doing that, had a history of doing that. They just said, we can't. In those days, they'd send you away. I mean, today they just said, get on out of my building and do it. But no, you had to pay the price. So the coach told me, he says, Petey, he said, I can't depend upon you. And I'm looking at him crazy. So what do you mean you can't depend upon me? And I'm as good as it gets on this team. And it took a long time for that to settle in. And what he was saying, he didn't know where I would be in juvenile detention or where I would be. I understand that now. But Chris took me up under his wing and he gave me 2 shots, I wound up first at Tennessee State. You didn't know, did you know that? And that's where I realized I could do some things.
What sport?
Basketball. Purely basketball.
How tall are you?
How tall am I today? About 6'8", 6'8.5". Yeah.
In your playing days, you were?
6'6", 6'7". Yeah, 6'6", 6'7". And the reality set in there. Yeah, I was just one of 13 guys. No better. Not as good as a couple of them, you know, but no better. And it got me through some things, you know. I got my GED, and about that time, I come home, and I left my wife at that time.
So you didn't graduate from high school?
No.
Well, how did you get from high school to
No,
college
no,
without graduating?
What they do? The GED. I took the GED, and you're familiar with predicting. And I scored really well. And the person, they said, you'll do well in college. You know, yeah, yeah.
Why didn't you graduate from high school?
I went to work. Merle and I had to go to work. Now, you know Gregory. You know my 3 younger brothers. Who was there to take care of them? Think about that. When you think back, who was there? Just their grandmother, my grandmother, and who? Me. And just had three mouths to feed. So I didn't, you know. And it was Chris that said, no, we're going to get you through this. Yeah, so I took the GED. No, I didn't graduate. A year early. You know, I left a year early. And then came home and stayed home for a couple of years looking after those guys. Then I got into Brandeis University. Yeah. And I was growing each time. You know, I grew a little bit, still wasn't quite ready.
Well, how did you get from Tennessee State to Brandeis?
Through special programs back in those days. And I'm sure they have them now, I just don't keep up. If they feel that they're looking for ringers, they come up with these programs, say, but we need a ringer, somebody we know that can do this. You know, that's how. Yeah, it was called Transitional Year program at Brandeis. And again, it was through Chris. Yeah. So got there and stayed there a couple of years and eventually got a degree.
Well, tell us about your experience from Tennessee State. I want to hear about some of your experiences at a historically black college and then transitioning to this prestigious Caucasian college.
It was like night and day. It was like night and day. At Tennessee State, they would kind of look over some of the things that you did and some of these shortcomings.
About what year was this?
60, 62. 62, yeah, 62. I could never forget, and this was a life lesson. Walking into that room, when we had to take the GED, and there were about 15 of us in there. And, you know, they were talking with that Southern accent and so forth. And I'm saying to myself, man, these guys are, yeah. I was the first one to finish, right? I was the first one to leave. I'm saying, ain't nothing to these guys. Those same guys, they had the fortitude to stick with it. And they went on to be principals. One has, what does Chris have down here in Mobile? He went on to a pharmacist, yeah. And he has a couple drugstores down to this day if he's still living. Yeah. But myself, big boy from Detroit, and you can Google him. God bless his soul, Reggie Hardy. He went on to play with the Pistons. But you can lead a horse to the water, you sure can't make him drink. You know, Reggie would not straighten up. He had some real issues with drugs even then, you know, and it cost him his life. You know, it cost Reggie his life. But we were part of that program down there, and we beat a team that went on to be the national champs with just me and Reggie and 3 other kids down there. I think about that today. But I'm thankful, and that's why I try to give back, in some ways.
So when you left why did you leave Tennessee State? And then, so you were there. Tell me how many years you were there. Why did you leave Tennessee State? And then tell me about this experience at Brandeis.
Okay. I left Tennessee State because I took the old me with me. You know, there were several girls down there, and one of them, had a little issue with me, and her daddy, he came down and he was gonna shoot me. They come and told me, he said, "You got to go, Pete. This is the last straw because you're gonna get killed down here." So I left Tennessee State and come home. Went to Brandeis, and everything just seemed to click in. We had, that's when the riots were going on, everybody was protesting. So most of the blacks on that campus lived in what we called the castle. And so we're gonna put you over because you're older. You're a little older and hopefully a little wiser, right? And we want you to keep things in line. And you know who told me that I was an embarrassment, I should be ashamed of myself? Angela Davis. She taught a course there. Institutions of Social Control, right? And she said, "You're older. You can help these kids instead of letting them do what they want to do." And you're signing off on that.
So for those of people who are listening to this or watching this, tell them who Angela Davis is.
Angela was a protester, very bright, PhD, Dr. Angela. And she protested the way things were going in this country. She had been accused of, I think it was bank robbery at that time, and she didn't care. She didn't care about that. She just wanted to see some good come. And I think she's still teaching? I think she might still be teaching today. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But what had happened was at that time, there were several students on the campus of Brandeis. They had gone out and robbed the bank. And they tried to associate that with Angela, saying that Angela put these kids up to do that. And they didn't. They didn't. But it wouldn't take much to do some research on Angela to find out what she really was about. And no nonsense. She'd tell you just what she thought. Yeah.
So you played basketball there, or you were just there going?
No, I was just
college. You were a college student.
It's a funny thing. I was just going to college, but now you know who lived out there? Bill Russell, Casey Jones.
And this is in what city?
Boston. Okay, but really Waltham was a nice suburb. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when they would have practices, they would use the Brandeis gym at times. And they said, well, we need another big man to help, we need somebody to position. So we'll give you, $20, that's how I made my little money, during the basketball season, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But no, I never played at Brandeis. There's only windows of opportunity that come along so often. And if you don't do it, just like you got that, you lose it. And I lost, my touch and my game. Yeah.
So did you develop a relationship with any of these players that played for the Boston Celtics?
Yes and no. How can I say that yes and no? We would talk, and we would go out and maybe eat lunch or something of that nature. And I would go to Bill's house and knew his wife and his kids. But they would tell me, he said, you don't take life serious. He said, you don't take life serious, man. You got whatever it is you're doing, you need to do it 100%. And I did, yeah. And it never really carried over from there. Plus, they knew that Reggie and I, and Reggie's reputation preceded him. If that makes sense, yeah. Yeah. But if I would see Bill today, see, I remember, yeah, that might not say anymore. Because at that time, I still needed a little polishing. Yeah.
So, tell me about some more experiences at Brandeis, because I had heard of that college, and when I hear the name, automatically I think prestige and elitist. So, tell me about your experience more, and how long were you there?
2 years. 2 years, and I've got to say that I never really had a problem because those that had all the money, for the most part, they stayed away. And it's pretty much true today, from what I can see. The teachers and the administrators were really nice, really nice. They bent over backwards. They created that program. And I can say that I didn't have a bad experience there. I did not have a bad experience there. But it's just like born in Nashville. I didn't have any serious problems in Nashville because I stayed within the parameters, if that makes sense. Yeah. Cynthia Gales, does that name sound familiar? Ran into Cynthia up there at she was at that college about 40. It wasn't Boston College. I can't remember, but we ran into her. And she didn't like it, but she knew she had to stay there to get that degree, And we would talk every now and then. She would come down to Brandeis, or we would run up there where she was at. She said, it's tough, but I'm going to hang because I know at the end of the rainbow there's going to be something, And I said, shit, that kid died on us too, yeah. Yeah. But we did Breckenridge's. The Breckenridge boys. We'd run into him. The one brother, on occasion, we would see him because they had a laboratory, MIT. and we would see him, and we would talk, yeah. But again, we were on different planes. They were strictly business. We were, about something else.
So, what was it like being in the Boston area? Did you have a social life there? What was it like for blacks in the 1960s in Boston, Massachusetts?
You might as well have been in Birmingham. I mean, you stayed in your own area. You dare not go out to what they call South Boston. Oh, no. You didn't do that. You didn't do that. And on the other extreme, there were places where we would go downtown. They were great. They treated you real good. There was a mixture of cultures, if you know what I'm saying. Even back in those days, yeah. And Boston to me was good. There was an organization there that Brighter Day, that was the name of it. And it was federally funded. And, skiing is real big up there. So, we'd buy the skis and all the outfits for the kids belong to the program. But again, when your mindset is not right, all these skis laying around here, I take them back on the campus somehow, sell them to the kids. That was wrong. But I didn't have any real issues in Boston. I like Boston. Yeah, I like Boston. But being out in the suburbs, it made it more than just livable. Because when people have money and prestige, they don't care. They don't care. They'll drink out of the same bottle. I don't know about eating the same type of food behind you, but no, they don't care. Yeah, it was great. Nashville was good. Nashville was real good to me. A couple of places down there. You been to Nashville? You been up on the hill? Okay, the New Era. Can you remember that club? Remember the old Grand Ole Opry? Mm-hmm. No, right there on Jefferson, down the hill. Mm-hmm. Now, instead of being at home studying for an exam, we were down at the New Air, right? So the Grand Ole Opry, after they finished up, it would be about 10 o'clock. Those same musicians would come up to the New Air, and they would play jazz and blues and so forth. And being young, not knowing, I asked myself, why are you playing that music that you play on if you? And they said, that old boy got a lot to learn about life. We got to eat. And that stuck with me. It still sticks with me, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Martin Luther King came through there. And we were sitting down in the park. They're on Jefferson. They come through and there was a lot of protesters there. White protesters protesting his being there. And then about 10 or 11 of them, they saw us sitting. We were sitting, right? Sitting on this bench. So they come over there towards us. And we all stood up. And I want you to visualize this. I was 6'7". Reggie was 7'2". The other guy was 6'10". We stood up, and they just walked away, like they hadn't even seen us. I said, yeah. It taught me a lesson there too. You don't have to worry about it. Only when there's in games. That's when you worry about people, even people of our color. One-on-one, no problem. Games, you're in trouble. So just walk away from it. Yeah. So I come back to Warren, and
Did you go see Martin Luther King when he was in Nashville?
oh yeah.
Well, tell me about that experience. Where was Martin Luther King speaking?
Right. I would say mid Jefferson Street. There was a park. In those days, there was the black parts and the white part. He was at the black part, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which would have been not that far from Meharry. Not that right down below Meharry, maybe a quarter of a mile below Meharry, and that's where he spoke, yeah. And what stood out to me with him, Cheryl, so I'm looking at this guy, and my visions were of a big guy. And I said, this guy, this like that. Yeah. And I said, wow, he's got a gift of gab, as we call it back in them days. He's got a real gift, but he made sense. He made everybody stand tall, yeah. In terms of getting a chance to talk to him, no. But I took it in. Yeah, I took it in. Yeah, Martin Luther King. Yeah.
And so then you came back to Warren. Why did you come back to Warren after? Because people ask me that all the time. You've lived all over the country. Why did you come back to Warren? So why did you come back to Warren?
I had to, I owed my grandmother something. Not my mother's mother, but my father. I know you're too young to remember her. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I owed her something. And it was not easy for her. Yeah. Because her husband, and God bless his soul, sometimes I couldn't understand him. So I said, no, I'm going to put a stop to this. I came back, yeah. And I was lucky enough to get a job at Copperwell. And I had been going out there. And I knew they were hiring people, right? But every time I went out there, we were not hiring. But I would run into some kids that I went to school with of a different ilk. So my grandmother said, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call Mr. Clee, William Clee, rich man, powerful around here. And she cleaned their house, which was normal back in those days. So I'm going to call him and tell him that you need a job. And I went to see him, and he said, I said, well, Mr. Clee, I went out there. And they said they weren't hired. He said, they told you what? I said, they told me they weren't hired. He gets on the phone. He says, there's a young man who needs a job to help take care of his grandmother. I'm sending him out there. And he hung the phone up. I went back out there. They had the paperwork. Yeah. And I worked there and worked there for 4 years. And
So what was it like working in a steel mill after you had been in college? And
it was tough. It was tough. And I'll tell you a little story after a bit. But in those days, you didn't get real good jobs in them, especially at Copperwell. They had a reputation for not hiring people of color. You know? When you went in there, you either went in the labor gang or the melt shop, which was real hot. So I went into the labor gang, and they would call me names like Rasmus and so forth. But you couldn't say anything. Rasmus and Jigger. But you couldn't say anything. You needed a job, And just from some of the people that my father knew, the guy's name was Lily Saperno. I don't know if that last name rings a bell or not. What about Joe Perfetti? Does that name ring a bell to you? Okay, yeah. So Lily said, "You Gator's son?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, I'm going to send for you to come over here and work for me in shipping, temporarily." And I went over there one day and I never went back. Never went back to the labor gang. And I stayed there for a year. And then General Motors started to build that plant at GM. So I went out there as a construction worker and went into the plant after it was completed. And stayed there. And then my godfather, Bob Dawson, says, "Why don't you come and, be with me?" And to this day, I guess it was okay. And, he got me this job and that job with the city through federal grants and so forth. And I wanted to go into Packard. And he told me, "Nah, that's not a high-profile job. You stay with me." Yeah.
so tell me about your experiences working for the city of Warren. I wasn't living here then, but...
Okay. How can I begin to talk about this?
I think, did you run a program or something? Or
Yeah, that was through
tell me about it.
Yeah. The Anti-Crime Task Force. Yeah. I ran that program. I ran another program.
Well, tell me about the programs.
They were all federally funded. Okay, they were all federally funded. Usually good for a year or two. Then we'd go to another one, and you kind of hire people that you knew, as opposed to hiring those that were qualified, more qualified. Yeah. And I did that. Did that for a while, and then Doc Sapera, he came to me. Now him and my father were whatever they, and he says, "Hey," "we don't have nobody black at the court, You think you might be interested in that?" I told him, yeah. So that's how I wound up as a juvenile probation officer.
See, I wasn't living here then.
Oh, yeah.
So were you like one of the first blacks to be a juvenile
I'm not going to
probation officer?
Yes.
I think you were the first black.
Yes, to be honest, yeah.
You were the first black African-American probation officer in the juvenile court in Trumbull County.
Yes, absolutely. And as time went on, we got Robert Davis, Bay Boy, over there with the sheriff's department, him and Darby, and that was a struggle. That was a struggle, but they came aboard. And I worked I became disinterested in that job. Because I was elevated, you know, to what we would call chief probation officer. They call it manager of probation services, right? Okay, it was a promotion, but what it did was it took me out of all the things that I like doing with the kids. You know, I wound up sitting in that office for 8 hours a day, you know, doing nothing. And that's when the Urban League beckoned. And I said, well, okay, I'll try this. You know, to run this program for the Urban League, which was anti-something, social something. And I want to go on record as saying this. I was wrong for taking that job and not letting the people at the court know, right? They only did it for like a week. And I said, well, I'll do this to help straighten it out. And then they can bring somebody in. Before I could even get to that point, here comes a reporter from the Tribune. This kid walked from the Tribune up to the court. And she said, Pete, she said, there's somebody down there right now in the office at the Tribune telling people that you're working 2 government jobs, which is illegal. You know? That's what he means, she said. As we talk, there's a preacher down there complaining about you. So, half hour go by, and I'm thinking about it. And I need to call Louis Reed, you know, see what Louis said, I don't know nothing about this. I said, well, the woman told me that this preacher is down there as I'm talking to you, and he wants something done. And Louis called the guy up. And at first the guy, he hauled around. And then Louis said, well, now wait a minute, Pastor. He said, Pete's right here, and he can get this person to verify it. And the guy said, well, yeah. And why? Why would you do that instead of coming to me? So that was a big stink. I had to wind up paying, and they blew it up, and the press blew it open, didn't they? It was in the paper every day for a week, you know. Pete's woes, that was the subtitle. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I had to, naturally, I had to resign. You know, they fired me, and I had to resign. And I went over there and stayed with the program at the Urban League for a year, 2 years. But see, they were fighting me tooth and nail over there, you know, because everybody had somebody they thought should have had the job. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's how that went. And then I said, nah, I need just like I need a hole in the head. Then there was, I had to look after Chucky, you know, they had to do what I needed to do to settle that. Steve and David were still young, had to take care of that. And then, and Cynthia, who was my second wife, we had a child. So I was overcome, you know. I had to get out and make some money. Yeah.
So all of your children are successful, you know, your brothers are successful that you helped raise. So what do you attribute that to? I mean, you obviously played an important role in all of their lives.
I don't know. I don't know. I ask myself that all the time.
Well, tell me about your children and what they're doing now.
Let's start with the oldest, which is Steve. Steve was a pretty good athlete, and he went on to graduate from college, and he's now the head basketball coach and athletic director up here at our local high school. And I'm very proud of him, because there was a time I went into his classroom and snatched him in his car. Said, you keep showing up. Yeah, so I'm proud of him. His brother, his younger brother, the second oldest boy, was a real good athlete. He went on to play at Michigan for the Steelers. And they say he's more like me than Steven. He's a knucklehead at times, but I love him still. Yeah. Then there's Chucky. He's come a long way. He does well for himself in his own way in time. And we stick together more than the other ones. He'll call me every day, make sure I answer the phone, and I appreciate that. Yeah.
And he's a what? What's his profession?
Chucky? He's a dog warden. He loves animals. And sometimes, he's in the right place because he loves that work. Yeah, he's in the right place. A lot of times, money's not that important if you don't mind getting up going to work every day. If you look forward to it, then you're in the right place. Yeah, I love him. He's okay. Yeah. Then there's Charlton. He left and went back with his mother to Mississippi. And I guess he does really well. He was always good with his hands. He's a barber and he could build stuff. Now he's a general contractor nowadays, so he's okay, yeah. So I've been blessed. Our family's been blessed. Nobody thought that would come to be. I can remember my grandmother crying and begging when we went down to the court right over there. Don't take these kids. We're talking about me. They were talking about those other three. I'll find a way to raise them. Yeah. So we are blessed. Yeah. Keep my fingers crossed. Did you know there was speaking of that courthouse, and how many people don't know that? On the side, to this side, those steps that go down. Your daddy ever tell you about what that was? Fred. You know what I'm talking about? Those steps that was the bathroom. For you know. Yeah. And I go to my podiatrist and a couple of my other doctors, and we're talking about the history of Warren. And I say, yeah, well, not much different. Not much. Give or take schools, but other than that, the housing patterns and I said, for instance, there's some steps leading down to the courthouse. That was for us. No. I said, yes. Yeah. Geneva Owens, her main priority, her job, back in that day, where we're at was Kresge's was, then there was a little soda fountain place. Her job was to make sure we got on that bus going home, not to go into them stores. And let me see your money. I'll never forget that. Well, you don't even need to be in here. Let me see your money that if you didn't have it, get out and wait and catch the bus. Yeah.
And she was the first African-American female police officer,
yes,
right?
Absolutely. Now, who was the first African-American male police officer? I'm not even sure. Nobody that's left really knows. Maybe Robert knows, but I surely don't know. I don't know yet, but she was the first. Yeah.
So what other discriminatory patterns do you remember other than those steps in the courthouse that black people had to utilize and stores? Were you all allowed to eat at any of the restaurants downtown, or were you allowed to go to the country club, or
no?
At the movie theaters, did you have to sit separately?
Yes. That's the one, the Harrison Warren, which was on High Street, in the corner of High and Park, I think it was. We didn't even go there. I mean, they let it be known they didn't want you in there. The Robbins, it was the balcony. That's where we all sit, in the balcony. In the Daniels, you kind of could sit where you wanted to sit, Sit down, because it didn't have a balcony, so we sit down towards the front, yeah. Which are the worst seats, because the closer you are to the movie theater, the blurrier the picture is, yeah. That and Kresge's. we would prefer to go to what they call sanitary dairy, which is out on the southeast side. At least they treated you halfway decent. You know, you go into Kresge's, it was a certain area that we knew to sit in. And that's where we went way down towards the end. And it would take them 2 hours to come and serve you. And by that time, you done missed the bus. You know, yeah. Walking to school, boy, you bring back some memories. The police used to stop us and tell us, where you going? And we're going up to the school, you know, to practice or do, what can you sing? Sing us a song. You know, and tap dance. And I'm telling you, can you do a jig too? Yeah, I guess we'll do what you want us to do. But those are the type of things, you know, we had to go through. And I had one police officer that he was bad about that. He came to work at the courthouse. And after all those years, he told me, he said, Pete, he said, I want to apologize. Because I was definitely wrong. Definitely wrong. I'm not going to call his name. And I accepted that. Because we all can change. You know, but Warren was not much different than Nashville in those days. Not much different in sports, what have you. You know, the great one, as I call it, Paul, Royfield, and people used to complain. Well, why is he playing instead of my boy? He's playing because he's a superstar. He's a super talented guy. But yeah, those things went on. Stacking positions. Have 4 or 5 kids of color playing behind each other. And they could have spread them out, you know, where they'd been starting. But no. Coach Riffle, he was bad. He was bad, yeah. He was bad. And there were kids even on the basketball that didn't make the team. And if you couldn't play, you weren't going to play up there at Arnold. You had to have some game. That was football, basketball, track, yeah.
So was Ronnie Barrett at Harding when you were there?
Ronnie was a year behind. Yeah. Ronnie was a good athlete. Yeah, baseball, basketball. He just felt he wanted to go to the service, you know. Yeah, he could have gone to school now. Yeah, certainly bright enough. Yeah. Ronnie, you know, boo-boo, tough as they come. You know, but he had his, you know, problems later on, you know, but he was tough as they come. He could have gone. But again, this is what happens in a town like Warren back in those days, and this happened to a lot of women. They chose to go to work and said, I'll go to school tomorrow. Tomorrow never comes because you're getting that paycheck, you buy an automobile, and then that's it. You know? Tommy Wesley, Joe Bryant, those names sound familiar. Very easily could have been doctors, lawyers, but they chose to go to work. They chose to go to Packard. And I don't know how many women that I've heard say, I wished I'd have never went there because I never got a chance to fulfill my dreams, you know, going to college, yeah. And that was a way. That was a way of keeping you in your place. That's by design. That is by design. And I've talked to people that are long gone, good people, right? They said, no, that's part of the program. Give them a job. Don't give them a chance to get, you know, to educate themselves, yeah.
Anything else you want to say?
No, I'll probably think of something when I get home, but I'm good with this.